After discovering that my brother had been secretly sabotaging my dating life for 2 full years, I decided to completely blow up his engagement. Now he's homeless, desperate, and standing at my door, begging me for mercy, but I'm not sure he deserves any. Imagine finding out the reason your entire life feels like a disaster. The reason you're convinced you're unlovable is because someone you trusted deeply has been systematically sabotaging you for years. And that someone? My own brother. What he did wasn't just cruel. It was a calculated, devastating campaign to destroy me, piece by agonizing piece. You know that person in your life who just sucks the air out of every room? For me, that was my brother, Roy. He was the golden child, the type who genuinely believed the entire world owed him something just for breathing. Growing up, he was Mom's precious baby, utterly incapable of doing anything wrong. Me? I was the disappointment, the one who apparently needed therapy after Dad left. I never really understood his deep-seated hatred for me. I mean, seriously, he had everything handed to him on a silver platter. Mom cooked his favorite meals every single night, paid for his fancy gym membership, even gave him endless spending money. Meanwhile, I was out there grinding, working double shifts at Target, just to put myself through community college. Eventually, I worked my way up, got promoted to shift manager, and finally saved enough to get my own apartment. I was so proud. Roy? At 23, he was still living at home, unemployed, claiming to be an entrepreneur, which basically meant selling dodgy workout supplements to his old high school buddies. But it wasn't just the blatant favoritism that stung. Roy would actually show up at my place, uninvited, just to hurl cruel comments about my appearance. He'd smirk and say things like, "Guys can smell the cat lady vibes from a mile away." Or, he'd grab my stomach, literally pinch the fat, and sneer, "This is why you're alone. Who wants to cuddle with a whale?" I really tried to just shrug it off as messed up sibling rivalry. But deep down, his words burned. After months of one disastrous relationship after another, I started to genuinely believe him. Maybe there really was something fundamentally wrong with me. My dating life? It was a full-blown catastrophe. Every single time I'd meet up with a guy, it felt like the world just spontaneously combusted around me, leaving me in the emotional wreckage. I remember one date, one guy. He took one look at me walking into Olive Garden, muttered, "Jesus Christ," under his breath, and walked straight back out the door. I sat there for an hour, pretending to study the menu, while the poor hostess kept politely asking if my party was still coming. Another time, a guy actually stood up in the middle of a crowded restaurant and announced to everyone, "This psycho told me she hopes my mom dies of cancer because I drive a Honda." He was showing his phone around to other tables, and I just sat there, shaking. The messages on his screen, supposedly from me, called him a pathetic virgin with a tiny wee. It was horrifying. This pattern, this absolute nightmare, continued for months. My self-esteem didn't just hit rock bottom, it tunneled straight through the Earth's core. I completely gave up on dating, threw myself into work just to escape. And Mom? She'd constantly ask why I wasn't seeing anyone, while Roy, sitting across the dinner table, would just smirk and chime in, "Even desperate guys have standards." Then, everything shifted. Roy, my unemployed, live-at-home brother, somehow got engaged to Natasha. She was this gorgeous blonde from serious money. Her dad owned multiple car dealerships, and her family treated Roy like he walked on water. Mom, of course, was over the moon, planning the wedding, gushing about how her baby boy had finally found the perfect woman. I just felt like an even bigger, more pathetic failure. My brother, who couldn't hold down a job, landed someone so successful while I couldn't even get a second date. It was 3 weeks before the wedding when I went to Roy's place to drop off his tux. I used his spare key, walked in, and there it was, his laptop, open on the bed. The screen showed my Hinge profile, but it wasn't my account. My hands started shaking so violently I could barely click the mouse. I clicked through the messages, and my blood ran cold. Roy had created fake profiles using my photos. He was messaging every single one of my matches. He told them I had herpes. He warned them I was psycho. He sent them edited screenshots of racist posts I'd never, ever made. There were spreadsheets with names, dates, and a meticulous record of every single lie he'd told to each guy. The folder was labeled Project Desperate, and it went back over 2 years. 2 years! But the worst part, the absolute gut punch, was finding emails between him and my former friend, Kelly. Kelly! She'd been feeding him information about my matches in exchange for Roy introducing her to his gym buddies. My whole body was trembling with pure, unfiltered rage. I immediately forwarded every single thing to myself. Then I saw another folder. This one was labeled Natasha Insurance. My stomach dropped. Inside were chilling, detailed plans to destroy Natasha's reputation if she ever tried to leave him. There were intimate photos she'd sent him, fake evidence of her cheating, all laid out. And then I saw it. Similar folders for 3 other girls he'd dated. It wasn't just me. He was a monster. I knew, deep in my gut, that I had to tell Natasha, but I was terrified. Terrified of ruining her life, of throwing everything into chaos, just 3 weeks before her wedding. After agonizing over it for what felt like an eternity, for hours, I finally made a decision. I created a fake email address and sent Natasha everything, every single file. I included a message, short and to the point, saying I was a concerned friend who had stumbled upon this information and felt she deserved to know the truth about her fiancé. The very next day, all hell broke loose. Natasha called off the wedding. Her dad, a powerful man, threatened to absolutely destroy Roy if he ever came near her again. She hired a lawyer, got a restraining order, and then, bless her, she moved across the country to start fresh. Good for her. Mom, predictably, initially defended Roy. Natasha's overreacting, she'd say. Boys will be boys. But she changed her tune real quick when I showed her the messages Roy had sent about her. He'd called her a pathetic old hag who was too stupid to see through his act. That hit her hard. Finally, she broke down. That same night, she kicked him out, literally throwing his gaming setup and all his precious protein powders onto the front lawn while the neighbors watched. It was brutal. And in less than a week, Roy lost his fiancée, his home, and his family. Poetic justice, you could say. 6 months later, he was standing at my door. 6 months. He looked terrible. Gaunt, clearly having lost a lot of weight. His expensive designer clothes replaced by a stained, grubby hoodie. He'd been living in his car, selling his belongings on Facebook Marketplace just to eat. And he was begging me to tell everyone he wasn't a monster. I stared at him through the crack in my door, the chain lock firmly in place. His eyes were bloodshot, desperate. Nothing like the cocky, arrogant brother who used to torment me. Part of me, the angry part, just wanted to slam the door in his face. But another part, a morbid curiosity, needed to hear what he had to say. Please, Roy whispered, his voice cracking. Just 5 minutes. I'm not asking for money or a place to stay. I just need someone to know the truth. I crossed my arms, staying safely behind the door. The truth? Like how you systematically destroyed my dating life for 2 years? Or how you were planning to blackmail Natasha? He flinched hard at her. Name. I know what I did was wrong. I'm not denying that. But everyone thinks I'm some kind of monster who belongs in prison. Mom won't even look at me. My friends blocked me. I can't get a job anywhere because Natasha's dad spread the word to every business owner he knows. Good, I said flatly, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. You deserve everything that's happening to you. Roy's shoulders sagged. I know. But I need you to understand why I did it. Dad leaving messed me up too. When he walked out, he told me I was the man of the house now. I was 12 years old and suddenly I had to be perfect for Mom. She put all her hopes on me while you got to be the victim who needed therapy and special attention. I felt my jaw clench. Special attention? You mean working 2 jobs while you sat at home playing video games? That's not what I mean, he said quickly. You got to process your feelings. You got to be human. I had to be Mom's perfect son who never showed weakness. And when you started succeeding on your own, getting promoted, moving out, dating, I felt like I was losing the only thing I was good at, being the successful one. So you decided to sabotage me instead of working on yourself. My voice was rising despite my desperate attempts to stay calm. Roy rubbed his face with shaking hands. I told myself I was protecting you, that those guys weren't good enough. But really, I was terrified you'd find someone and leave me behind, like Dad did. I know how sick that sounds now. I studied his hollow cheeks, the way his clothes hung, loose on his frame. This wasn't the arrogant brother who used to strut around like he owned the world. But I wouldn't let myself feel sorry for him. Not after everything he'd put me through. You need professional help, Roy, not my forgiveness. I've been trying, he pleaded desperately. But therapy costs money I don't have. I've been sleeping in my car for 3 months. I sold everything, even my phone. I have to use the library computer to look for jobs, but no one will hire me. Natasha's dad had definitely made sure of that. Maybe you should have thought about consequences before you decided to play God. With people's lives. I shot back, my voice laced with ice. Roy's face crumpled. I think about it every single day. I lie awake in my car, replaying every cruel thing I did. Remember when that guy walked out of Olive Garden? My stomach lurched. I was sitting in my car in the parking lot watching. I saw you through the window, pretending to read the menu for an hour. I felt powerful watching you suffer. How sick is that? My stomach churned, a wave of nausea washing over me at the confession. You were there? I was there for a lot of them, he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. I'd follow you on dates sometimes just to see my handiwork. I told myself it was funny that you'd thank me someday for keeping those losers away. But really, I was just a pathetic coward who couldn't stand seeing his sister happy. I gripped the doorframe, steadying myself. All those nights I'd come home crying, wondering what was so fundamentally wrong with me. He'd been orchestrating the whole thing. The sheer depth of his betrayal hit me all over again, a fresh, searing pain. Do you have any idea what you put me through? My voice was barely above a whisper, raw with emotion. I thought I was fundamentally broken. I went to therapy, convinced something was wrong with my personality. I changed everything about myself, trying to figure out why every guy ran away. I know, Roy sobbed, tears streaming down his face. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't fix anything, I spat, the words a venomous release. Sorry doesn't give me back 2 years of my life. Sorry doesn't erase the nights I cried myself to sleep wondering why I was so unlovable. Roy slumped against my doorframe. I know it doesn't. But I need you to know that I'm trying to change. I've been going to free support groups at the community center. I'm working through my issues with Dad, with jealousy, with control. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just needed to tell someone that I'm trying to be better. I watched him for a long moment, this broken shell of my former tormentor. Part of me, a tiny, foolish part, wanted to believe he could change. But the bigger part, the wiser part, remembered all the calculated cruelty, the meticulous spreadsheets of lies, the folders full of blackmail material. I can't help you, Roy, I said finally, my voice firm, unwavering. What you did wasn't just mean or petty. It was systematic abuse. You didn't just hurt me, you hurt Natasha. And who knows how many other women. You need to face the consequences of that. I am facing them, he said desperately. I've lost everything. My home, my family, my future. I'm not asking you to make it go away. I just needed someone to know that I understand what I did was evil, that I'm not just sorry I got caught. I started to close the door, but he pressed his hand against it. Wait, please. There's something else you need to know. Kelly. She's been spreading rumors about you at your work. She blames you for me cutting her off and she's trying to get revenge. I wanted to warn you. My blood ran cold. What kind of rumors? She's telling people you steal from the registers, that you've been skimming cash. I overheard her at the library talking to someone named Derek about it. I know I have no right to warn you after everything, but I couldn't let her hurt you more because of me. I felt a familiar dread settling in my stomach. Just when I thought the nightmare was finally over, there was more. Why should I believe you? You shouldn't, Roy admitted, his gaze dropping. I've given you no reason to trust me, but check your work situation. Watch your back around Kelly. She's angrier than I ever was, and she's got nothing left to lose either. I stared at him, trying to process this new, unsettling information. Was this another manipulation? Or was he actually trying to help? I couldn't tell anymore. Trust was something he'd thoroughly destroyed. I need you to leave now, I said firmly, my voice leaving no room for argument. Don't come back here. Don't contact me. If what you're saying about Kelly is true, I'll handle it myself. But we're done, Roy. This is the last conversation we're ever having. He nodded slowly, accepting the finality in my voice. I understand. I want you to be happy. I know I have no right to want that, after everything I did to prevent it. But I hope you find someone who sees how amazing you are. Someone who deserves you. I already have, I said quietly, a small defiant smile touching my lips. His name is Marcus. We've been together for 3 months, and you know what? He's never once made me feel like I'm not enough. Roy's face showed genuine surprise. That's good. I'm glad. No thanks to you, I reminded him. Now leave. And if I see you near my apartment again, I'm calling the police. He backed away from my door, shoulders hunched against the cold. Take care of yourself, he said softly. And watch out for Kelly. She's been hanging around your work a lot lately. I watched him shuffle down the hallway toward the stairwell, looking nothing like the arrogant brother who used to rule our family. When he disappeared around the corner, I quickly shut and locked my door, adding the deadbolt for good measure. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone to text Marcus. He needed to know Roy had shown up. But first, I needed to process what I just learned about Kelly. If she was really trying to sabotage me at work, I had bigger problems than my homeless brother. I sank onto my couch, utterly exhausted by the encounter. Roy's visit had reopened wounds I thought were starting to heal. But his warning about Kelly, it gnawed at me. Derek, a coworker, had been acting strange lately, watching me more closely, during our shifts asking weird questions about the register counts. Tomorrow, I'd have to go to work and pretend everything was normal, all while figuring out if my former friend was trying to destroy my life. The irony wasn't lost on me that Kelly was now doing exactly what Roy had taught her, targeting me because she blamed me for her own choices. I thought about Roy sleeping in his car tonight and felt a tiny pang of something that might have been pity. But then I remembered all those nights I'd cried myself to sleep, convinced I was unlovable, while he sat at home laughing at his spreadsheets. No, he'd earned every bit of his current misery. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus asking if I wanted to grab dinner. I smiled despite everything, grateful to have found someone who saw past all the damage Roy had tried to inflict. Maybe that was the best revenge of all, being happy despite my brother's best efforts to destroy me. But first I had to deal with Kelly. If she thought she could pick up where Roy left off, she was about to learn I wasn't the same broken girl who used to cry over failed dates. I'd survived my brother's campaign of destruction. I could handle whatever she threw at me. As I texted Marcus back, I made a mental note to document everything at work tomorrow. If Kelly wanted a war, she'd get one. But this time, I'd be ready for the sabotage before it destroyed me. Roy had taught me that family could be your worst enemy. Now, I knew to watch for threats from every direction. The girl who used to sit alone at Olive Garden, pretending to read the menu, was gone. In her place was someone who'd learned to fight back, to protect herself, and to recognize manipulation before it took root. Roy might have broken me once, but he'd also inadvertently created someone stronger. Tomorrow would bring new challenges with Kelly and Derek at work, but tonight, I had dinner plans with someone who actually cared about me. And that was worth more than any revenge I could plot against my brother or his accomplice. The next morning, stepping into Target, I kept my guard way up. I scanned the aisles, bracing myself for any sign of Kelly. Derek, that creepy coworker, was already there, clipboard in hand, watching me count the register drawer with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I was meticulous. I documented every penny, took photos of the count sheets, and made sure another team member witnessed my opening procedures. "Everything okay, Derek?" I asked casually, though my heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. He looked up from his clipboard, eyes narrowed. "Just making sure all our procedures are being followed correctly. There have been some concerns raised about inventory discrepancies in your department." I forced myself to stay calm. "I haven't noticed any issues. My counts have been perfect for the past 6 months." "Well, we'll see about that," he muttered, scribbling another note. Throughout my shift, I noticed him hovering nearby, pretending to check end caps while obviously monitoring my every transaction. When I finally went on break, I caught him going through my register area, checking under the counter, even lifting the keyboard. I took photos from around the corner, documenting his utterly suspicious behavior. That's when I spotted Kelly. She was near the customer service desk, chatting with one of the newer cashiers. She wore sunglasses indoors, which was weird, and kept glancing in my direction. When our eyes met, she actually smirked and whispered something that made the cashier look at me with concern. I texted Marcus immediately, letting him know what was happening. He responded within minutes, telling me to document everything and that he'd pick me up after my shift. Having his support made me feel so much less alone in this new battle. During lunch, I overheard 2 coworkers whispering near the break room. "I heard she's been taking 20s from the register and replacing them with 1s, one said. "Kelly saw her do it last week." "That's not true," I said firmly, stepping into view. Both coworkers looked embarrassed at being caught gossiping. "Kelly hasn't worked here in months. How could she have seen anything?" They exchanged glances and hurried away, but the damage was already being done. By the end of my shift, I'd heard 3 different versions of how I was supposedly stealing from the company. Each story was more elaborate than the last. When I got home that evening, my stomach dropped. There was a notice taped to my door. The apartment complex had received multiple complaints about noise, suspicious visitors, and possible illegal activity in my unit. They were conducting an investigation, and warned that lease violations could result in eviction. I immediately called the office, but they were closed. The notice was dated 3 days ago, but I'd never seen it before. Had Roy been intercepting my mail, just like he'd warned about Kelly doing? Marcus arrived with takeout, but I'd completely lost my appetite. I showed him the notice and explained everything that had happened at work. He pulled me into a hug, and for the first time all day, I felt like I could actually breathe. "We're going to figure this out," he said firmly. "But first, we need to be strategic. Roy might be homeless, but he's clearly not done trying to destroy your life." Over the next few days, things escalated quickly. I started receiving calls from unknown numbers at all hours. When I answered, there was only breathing on the other end. My car tires were mysteriously low every morning, though I couldn't find any punctures. Neighbors I'd been friendly with for years suddenly avoided eye contact in the hallway. Then came the meeting with my manager. She called me into her office with a grim expression. Derek sat beside her, looking smugly satisfied. "We've had some serious allegations brought to our attention," she began. "Multiple employees have reported seeing you pocket cash from your register." "That's impossible," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "I've never stolen anything in my life. Check the cameras. Check my register counts. They're always perfect." "The thing is," Derek interjected, a sickening smirk on his face, "the cameras in your section have been mysteriously malfunctioning for the past week. Isn't that convenient?" I stared at him in disbelief. "Are you seriously suggesting I somehow disabled security cameras? I don't even have access to that system." My manager sighed. "We're not accusing you of anything yet, but we need to conduct a full investigation. In the meantime, you're being moved to the stockroom. No register access until this is resolved." I left her office feeling numb. Being removed from register duty was basically a demotion, and everyone would know I was under investigation. As I walked through the store, I could feel my coworkers' eyes on me, their whispers following in my wake. In the stockroom, I threw myself into organizing inventory, trying not to think about how quickly my life was unraveling again. That's when I found it. Tucked behind a box of paper towels, a Target bag filled with cash, roughly $300 in small bills. My name was written on a sticky note attached to it. My hands shook as I realized what this was. Someone had planted evidence to frame me. If I reported it, would they believe I just found it? If I didn't report it and someone else discovered it, I'd look guilty for sure. I took photos from every angle, then immediately brought the bag to my manager. Her face went pale when she saw it. "I just found this hidden in the stockroom," I explained. "Someone is trying to frame me. Please check when this money went missing. Check who had access to the stockroom. I've been documenting everything strange that's been happening." She took the bag but looked skeptical. "This is very serious. We'll need to involve corporate loss prevention now." That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the building made me jump. Around 3 a.m., I heard something at my door. Peering through the peephole, I saw a figure in a hoodie trying to slip something under my door. I yanked it open, but they were already running down the hallway. On the floor was an envelope full of printed screenshots, messages between me and various men saying horrible things. The dates matched my recent attempts at online dating, but I'd never sent these messages. They were filled with racial slurs, threats, and disturbing content. A note was attached. "Your boyfriend should know who he's really dating." I called Marcus immediately, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. He came over despite the late hour, and we went through everything together. The messages were convincingly edited, using my actual profile photos and mimicking my writing style. "This is Roy," Marcus said grimly. "He's escalating because you rejected him. We need to go to the police." "With what evidence?" I asked desperately, my voice cracking. "He warned me this would happen. Everyone already thinks I'm a thief at work. Now there are fake prejudiced messages. Who's going to believe me?" The next day, things got even worse. My car wouldn't start. When I popped the hood, I could smell something sickeningly sweet. Sugar in the gas tank. Just like Roy had threatened. The repair would cost over $1,000. Money I didn't have, especially if I lost my job. While waiting for the tow truck, I noticed a familiar car circling the parking lot. Roy's beat-up Honda, the one he'd been living in. I ducked behind a van and called Marcus. "He's here," I whispered frantically. "He's driving around the lot looking for me." "Stay hidden," Marcus said, his voice calm and steady. "I'm on my way with Jake." Jake was Marcus's cousin, a tech-savvy guy who'd offered to help us document everything digitally. They arrived just as Roy was making another loop. Jake had his phone out, openly recording everything. We watched Roy park and get out, looking around nervously. He approached my broken-down car and actually smiled. Then he walked to the apartment building's mailboxes. I watched in horror as he used some kind of tool to open mine, rifling through my mail. "That's a federal crime, buddy," Jake whispered, still recording. "We've got him." But Roy wasn't done. He pulled out several envelopes and replaced them with different ones. Then he closed the mailbox and headed back to his car. We stayed hidden until he drove away. When we checked my mailbox, we found due notices for payday loans I'd never taken out. The original applications had my forged signature and all my personal information. The amounts were staggering, over $10,000 in high-interest debt. "He's trying to destroy your credit," Marcus said grimly, examining the papers. "Make it so you can't renew your lease or get another apartment." I felt the walls closing in around me. Between the investigation at work, the apartment complaints, and now this financial sabotage, Roy was systematically destroying every single aspect of my stability. And he was doing it all while homeless himself, driven by pure, unadulterated spite. That evening, Mom showed up at my door with 2 police officers. Her face was tear-stained and frantic. "Where is it?" she demanded. "Where's my money?" "What are you talking about?" I asked, genuinely confused. "Roy told me you've been stealing my Social Security checks," she cried. "He showed me bank statements. Thousands of dollars missing, all traced to you." The officers looked uncomfortable, but explained they were conducting a welfare check and needed to search my apartment for the allegedly stolen funds. I let them in, knowing they'd find nothing, but feeling utterly humiliated as they went through my belongings. "Mom, think about this," I pleaded while they searched. "How would I even access your accounts? Roy lived with you, he had access to everything." But she wouldn't listen. Roy had been feeding her lies for weeks, showing her doctored evidence, playing the victim. Even when the officers found nothing, she looked at me with suspicion. "He said you'd hidden it somewhere else," she muttered. "Said you were always jealous of him." After they left, I broke down completely. Marcus held me while I sobbed, feeling the overwhelming weight of Roy's campaign crushing me. He'd turned our mother against me, my co-workers, my neighbors. I was becoming a pariah in my own life. The next morning, Kelly actually showed up at Target during my shift. She made a big show of shopping in my section, loudly telling another customer that she didn't feel safe with certain employees who had sticky fingers. Derek appeared immediately, as if on cue, to ask if there was a problem. "I just think customers should know when employees are under investigation for theft," Kelly said, her voice piercing, loud enough for everyone to hear. "It's a matter of public safety." I wanted to confront her, to scream at her, but I knew that's exactly what she wanted. Instead, I bit my tongue and continued stocking shelves, my phone discreetly propped up between boxes, recording every word of her harassment. That's when I noticed something. Kelly kept checking her phone, then looking toward the entrance. Derek was doing the same thing. They were coordinating, waiting for something. And then Roy walked in. He looked terrible, even worse than when he'd shown up at my door. But there was something manic, almost triumphant in his eyes as he approached my section. Kelly and Derek flanked him like some kind of twisted, pathetic support group. "Hey, sis," Roy said loudly, his voice dripping with false concern. "Heard you're having some troubles at work. Karma is really something, isn't it?" My hidden phone was still recording. "You need to leave, Roy. You're not supposed to be here." "It's a public store," he said with a smirk. "I'm just shopping, right, Derek?" Derek nodded, playing along. "He's a customer. You can't discriminate against customers." Roy picked up items randomly, making a show of examining them while talking just loudly enough for other customers to hear. "You know, it's sad when people can't take responsibility for their actions, blaming others for their problems, playing victim." I realized what he was doing. He was trying to provoke me into losing my temper, giving Derek an excuse to fire me. On the spot. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood and continued working, even as Roy followed me through the aisles. "Remember when you ruined my life?" he continued, his voice rising. "Took everything from me? Well, how does it feel now? Not so fun being on the receiving end, is it?" Kelly let out a harsh, cackling laugh that drew stares from other shoppers. "She deserves everything that's happening. She's nothing but a lying thief who destroys families." That's when Marcus and Jake appeared at the end of the aisle. They'd been waiting in the parking lot and came in when they saw Roy enter. Jake had his phone out, openly recording now. Actually, Marcus said calmly, his voice cutting through the manufactured drama, we've been documenting everything. Roy, breaking into her mailbox. The planted evidence. The forged loan applications. We even got you on camera putting sugar in her gas tank. Roy's face went completely pale. Derek stepped back, looking uncertain. Kelly's smugness faltered, dissolving into a look of panic. You're lying! Roy stammered, but his voice shook. Jake turned his phone around, showing a clear video of Roy at my mailboxes. Federal crime, buddy. And we've got copies of everything. The fake dating profiles, the messages to her neighbors, all of it. I pulled out my own phone. And I've been recording this whole interaction. 3 Target employees harassing me while I'm trying to work. Pretty sure corporate would be interested in seeing this. Derek's face flushed crimson. You can't record in here without permission. Actually, Marcus said, stepping forward, she can record anything that involves her own safety and harassment. And considering one of these people already has a restraining order against them for similar behavior, I'd say she has good reason. That was a bluff. Natasha's restraining order was in another state, but Derek didn't know that. He backed away further, suddenly realizing he might have aligned himself with the wrong side. Roy's expression twisted into something ugly, truly hateful. You think you've won? You have no idea what I'm capable of. I've got nothing left to lose. Neither do I, Kelly added, but she was already edging toward the exit, looking for an escape. That's when my manager appeared with security. Someone had reported a disturbance. She took one look at the scene, at Derek standing with 2 non-employees who were harassing her staff, and her expression hardened. Everyone who doesn't work here needs to leave immediately, she said firmly. Derek, my office now! Roy tried to protest, but security was already escorting him out, their grip firm. Kelly scurried after him, suddenly not so brave. Derek looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor as he followed our manager. I stood there shaking, adrenaline coursing through me. Marcus wrapped an arm around my shoulders while Jake continued recording Roy and Kelly in the parking lot, where they were having what looked like a heated argument. It's not over, I said quietly, the words heavy with resignation. He's not going to stop. No, Marcus agreed, but now we have evidence. Real evidence. And he knows we're watching. My manager returned and pulled me aside. Her face was much softer now. I've reviewed the security footage from today and the past week. It's clear you've been targeted. I'm ending the investigation and putting a no trespass order on those 2. And Derek? He's being terminated for collaborating with non-employees to harass staff. I felt a monumental wave of relief wash over me, but it was tempered by the chilling knowledge that Roy was still out there, still plotting. This victory was just one battle in what was quickly becoming a full-blown war. Over the next few days, I worked tirelessly with Marcus and Jake to compile all our evidence. We created backups of everything, storing copies in multiple locations. I filed police reports for the mail theft, the vandalism to my car, and the identity theft with the payday loans. The loan companies were surprisingly helpful once I provided evidence of the forgery. They'd seen this kind of family fraud before. It would take time, but they agreed to remove the debts from my record. My apartment complex was harder to convince. The fake complaints had piled up, and even though I could prove Roy had been intercepting my mail, they were nervous about renewing my lease. I started looking for new places, but my credit, now completely trashed, made it incredibly difficult. Then came the night Roy tried to break into my actual apartment. I woke to the terrifying sound of scratching at my door. Through the peephole, I could see him, hunched over, working on the lock with some kind of tool. My hands shook uncontrollably as I called 911, whispering my address and the situation. He's trying to break in, I told the dispatcher. He's my brother. He's been stalking and harassing me for weeks. I grabbed my phone and started recording, getting clear audio of him muttering to himself as he worked. Gonna plant the substances, get her evicted, show her what real loss feels like. He actually had substances with him. He was planning to plant them in my apartment right before my lease renewal inspection. The depth of his planning, his sheer dedication to destroying me, was utterly terrifying. The police arrived just as he managed to get the door open. The chain lock held, thank God, but I'll never forget the look in his eyes when he saw me standing there with my phone recording everything. It wasn't anger or surprise. It was pure, unadulterated hatred. You destroyed my life, he snarled as the officers pulled him back. You took everything from me. No, Roy, I said, my voice surprisingly steady, despite the trembling in my hands. You did that all by yourself. As they handcuffed him, he started ranting about how I'd turned everyone against him, how I'd ruined his engagement, how I was the evil one. The officers found the substances on him, along with burglary tools and printed emails showing his detailed plans to plant evidence. What happened next was surreal. Jake had been live streaming to our family group chat the whole time. He'd positioned himself in the stairwell when I texted that Roy was at my door. Mom, my aunts, my cousins, they all watched in real time as Roy tried to break into my apartment with substances. Mom called me while the police were still there. She was sobbing, apologizing, saying she couldn't believe what she'd just seen. She'd watched her son, the one she'd protected and enabled for years, try to frame me for a crime that could have ruined my life. "I'm so sorry," she kept saying. "I'm so sorry. I'll tell the police everything." Everything he told me. All the lies. And she did. She gave a full detailed statement about Roy's manipulation, the forged bank statements he'd shown her, the lies he'd told about me stealing from her. Her testimony, combined with the undeniable video evidence and the attempted break-in, was enough for serious charges. Roy was arrested for attempted breaking and entering, possession with intent to distribute, identity theft, mail fraud, and stalking. With his previous record of harassment with Natasha and all the evidence we'd compiled, he was looking at significant jail time. At his arraignment, I sat in the back of the courtroom with Marcus. Roy looked small, pathetic, in his orange jumpsuit. Nothing like the cocky brother who used to torment me. When the judge read the charges, he actually tried to argue that I'd set him up, that this was all part of my master plan to destroy him. The judge, thankfully, was not impressed. Bail was set high enough that Roy couldn't pay it. He'd be staying in jail until his trial. As they led him away, he turned to look at me one last time. I expected to see pure hatred. But instead, there was something else. Fear. He was finally facing real consequences for his actions. Kelly disappeared after that night at Target. Last I heard, she'd moved to another state to live with relatives. Without Roy pulling the strings, she'd completely lost her nerve. The rumors at work died down quickly once everyone learned the truth about the harassment campaign. My apartment complex, after reviewing the police reports and understanding the situation, agreed to renew my lease. My coworkers, who'd been suspicious of me, now went out of their way to be supportive. Even Derek's replacement made a point of apologizing for what I'd been put through. But the real, profound change was in my relationship with Mom. She started therapy to understand how she'd enabled Roy's behavior for so long. She wrote me a long, heartfelt letter, taking responsibility for the favoritism, for not protecting me, for being blind to Roy's manipulation. We started having weekly dinners, just the two of us. It was awkward at first. Rebuilding a relationship that had been damaged by years of dysfunction, but slowly, painfully, we found our way to something healthier. Roy was sentenced to 18 months in county jail. It wasn't as long as some people thought he deserved, but it was enough to give me peace. 18 months where I didn't have to look over my shoulder, where I could finally start rebuilding my life without the constant fear of his next scheme. The day after his sentencing, I was at work when the phone at customer service rang. They called my name over the intercom, saying I had a call. My stomach dropped, wondering who would call me at work. "This is a collect call from the county." "Jail," the automated voice said. "Will you accept charges from inmate Roy Patterson?" I stared at the phone for a long moment. Part of me wondered what he could possibly have to say. Was he going to apologize? Threaten me? Beg for forgiveness? But then I remembered all the pain he'd caused, all the nights I'd cried, all the damage he'd done not just to me, but to every woman he'd targeted. I remembered the look in his eyes when he tried to break into my apartment, the hatred and absolute determination to destroy me. "No," I said firmly, my voice clear and unwavering. "I do not accept the charges." I hung up and went back to work. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, asking if I wanted to grab lunch. I smiled, texting back that I'd love to. Life was finally getting back to normal. Or maybe even better than normal. I had a supportive partner, a rebuilt relationship with my mother, and the quiet, powerful knowledge that I'd survived everything my brother had thrown at me. Roy would call again over the following weeks. Always collect, always declined. Eventually, the calls stopped. Maybe he finally understood that I was done, that our relationship was over, that he'd burned every bridge beyond repair. 6 months later, Marcus and I moved to a new city for his job opportunity. It felt like a true fresh start, a chance to build a life without the constant shadow of my past hanging over me. We found a nice apartment, and I transferred to a Target in our new area with a glowing recommendation from my previous manager. Slowly, mercifully, the nightmares about Roy began to fade. I still have the videos Jake recorded, all the evidence of everything Roy did. Sometimes I look at them, just to remind myself that it really happened, that I wasn't crazy or paranoid. But mostly, I focus on moving forward, on building the life Roy tried so hard to steal from me. The last I'd heard from Mom, Roy was due to be released soon. She said he'd been writing her letters from jail, claiming he'd changed, found religion, wanted to make amends. She didn't believe him anymore. Neither did I. Some people can change, can recognize their toxic behaviors and work to become better. But Roy? He had shown, time and again, that he was driven by something darker, a primal need to control and destroy that went far beyond simple jealousy or insecurity. I hoped he'd prove me wrong. I hoped he'd get out and build a better life. Get the help he clearly needed, and never hurt anyone again. But I wouldn't be around to find out. That chapter of my life was closed. And I wasn't interested in reading the sequel. My story doesn't have a neat, happy ending where the family reunites, and everyone forgives each other. Real life is messier than that. Sometimes the best thing you can do is walk away, protect yourself, and build something better from the ashes of what was destroyed. Roy taught me a lot, though not in the way he intended. He taught me to trust my instincts, to document everything, to stand up for myself even when everyone else doubts me. He taught me that family isn't always safe, that sometimes the people who should protect you are the ones causing the most harm. But most importantly, he taught me that I'm stronger than I ever knew. I survived his worst efforts to break me. I found love despite his sabotage. I rebuilt my life every single time he tried to tear it down. And in the end, that's the best revenge of all. Living well despite someone's best efforts to ensure you don't. The girl who used to cry in Olive Garden is gone. But I don't mourn her. She needed to evolve, to grow stronger, to learn to protect herself. Roy's cruelty forged me into someone who won't be victimized again, who knows her worth, who refuses to let anyone dim her light. And that's the irony of it all. In trying to destroy me, Roy created his own worst enemy, a sister who survived everything he threw at her and came out stronger on the other side. A sister who finally learned that sometimes the only way to win is to refuse to play the game. At all. The morning after declining Roy's call, I arrived at work to find a new problem waiting for me. My locker had been pried open, and someone had stuffed it full of empty cash register bags with my name written on them. The message was clear. Roy might be in jail, but he still had people on the outside. I immediately reported it to my manager and security. They reviewed the overnight footage and found a hooded figure breaking in around 2 a.m. The build was wrong for Roy, too short and stocky. This was someone new. Over the next few days, more incidents piled up. My car was keyed, with the word thief scratched deep into the paint. Anonymous complaints flooded the corporate hotline, claiming I was dealing substances in the parking lot. Someone even called in a bomb threat using a voice modulator, claiming I'd planted explosives in the store. Marcus and I were at our wits' end. We thought Roy's arrest would end the harassment, but it seemed to be escalating. That's when Jake made a discovery that changed everything. He'd been monitoring Roy's old social media accounts and found a pattern. Before each incident, there were coded messages posted from a library computer. Times, locations, instructions. Roy was orchestrating everything from jail, using contraband phones and outside accomplices. We took the evidence to the detective handling Roy's case. She was furious that he was continuing his harassment from behind bars. Within hours, Roy's cell was searched. They found 2 phones, detailed plans for future harassment, and a notebook full of contacts willing to help him for the right price. The additional charges were serious: witness intimidation, conspiracy, and violating a restraining order from jail. His 18-month sentence was looking more like 5 years. But even that didn't stop him from trying one last desperate move. Mom called me crying one afternoon. Roy had somehow convinced a fellow inmate to contact her, claiming I'd hired someone to attack him in jail. He said he was in the infirmary, barely alive, and needed money for protection. The caller described gruesome injuries and begged Mom to wire funds immediately. Thankfully, Mom had learned her lesson. She called the jail directly and discovered Roy was perfectly fine, sitting in solitary confinement for the phone incident. The scam attempt just added fraud charges to his growing list, but the real shock came during Roy's trial. The prosecutor had been building a much bigger case, and what they uncovered was staggering. Roy hadn't just targeted me and Natasha. There were 7 other women over the past 5 years. Ex-girlfriends, co-workers who'd rejected him, Even a neighbor who'd complained about his loud music. Each woman told similar, horrifying stories. Fake dating profiles, planted evidence, systematic harassment designed to isolate and destroy them. One had lost her job and moved across the country. Another had a nervous breakdown and spent months in therapy. The pattern was clear and utterly devastating. When it was my turn to give a victim impact statement, I looked at Roy sitting there in his orange jumpsuit. He'd lost even more weight, his face gaunt and hollow. But his eyes still held that familiar anger, that unshakable sense of entitlement that had driven him to hurt so many people. I told the court about the 2 years of sabotage dates, the planted evidence, the way he'd turned our mother against me. But I also talked about the other victims, the women who'd suffered in silence, too afraid or ashamed to come forward until now. The judge's sentence was harsh but fair. 7 years in state prison, with mandatory psychological treatment. Roy would also have to pay restitution to all his victims, and would be banned from using the internet for 5 years after his release. As they led him away, Roy turned to look at me one last time. I expected rage or threats, but instead he just looked empty, defeated. Maybe prison would finally force him to confront what he'd become. Or maybe he'd spend 7 years plotting revenge. Either way, it wasn't my problem anymore. Kelly resurfaced briefly during the trial, subpoenaed to testify about her role in the harassment. She broke down on the stand, admitting Roy had manipulated her with promises of friendship and belonging. She'd been lonely and desperate for connection, and he'd exploited that. While her actions were inexcusable, I felt a tiny bit of sympathy. Roy had a twisted gift for finding people's weaknesses and twisting them to his advantage. She received probation and community service for her part in the harassment. Last I heard, she was in therapy and had moved back in with her parents in another state. Sometimes people can learn from their mistakes. I hoped she was one of them. The trial's end brought unexpected closure in other ways. Several of Roy's victims reached out to me, and we formed a support group. Hearing their stories, seeing how they'd rebuilt their lives, helped me realize I wasn't alone. Roy had left a trail of destruction, but we had all survived. Mom threw herself into therapy with a determination I'd never seen before. She joined a support group for parents of adult children with personality disorders. She read every book, attended every session, and slowly began to understand how her enabling had contributed to Roy's behavior. Our relationship truly transformed. For the first time, she saw me as an individual, not just in relation to Roy. We talked about my childhood, my dreams, my fears. She apologized repeatedly for the years of favoritism, for not protecting me, for being blind to Roy's true nature. 6 months after the trial, Marcus proposed. It was simple and perfect, just the two of us at our favorite restaurant. As I said, yes, I thought about how different my life had become. 2 years ago, I'd been convinced I was unlovable, broken, destined to be alone. Now I was planning a future with someone who'd stood by me through the worst period of my life. We decided on a small wedding, just close friends and family. Mom helped with the planning, and it became another step in healing our relationship. She was different now, supportive without being overbearing, proud without making comparisons to Roy. The day before the wedding, I received a letter. The return address was the state prison where Roy was serving his sentence. My hands shook as I held the envelope. Marcus offered to read it for me, but I needed to do this myself. Inside was a single page in Roy's handwriting. Not an apology or an explanation, but a strange, rambling message about how I'd stolen his life, how everything would have been perfect if I'd just played my role. He ended with a chilling promise that he'd be thinking of me on my wedding day, and that someday, when I least expected it, he'd return the favor for everything I'd done to him. I showed the letter to the detective who'd handled his case. She assured me it would be added to his file and that any further threats would extend his sentence. But I wasn't scared anymore. Roy had no power over me. He was locked away, and I was free. The wedding was beautiful. Mom walked me down the aisle since Dad had never really been part of our lives. She cried happy tears and told me how proud she was of the woman I'd become. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had a real mother. Marcus and I honeymooned in Hawaii, as far from Roy and his toxic influence as we could get. We spent a week on the beach, and I didn't check my phone once. No harassment, no planted evidence, no mysterious calls. Just peace. When we returned, there was a job offer waiting, a management position at a different retail chain with better pay and benefits. My former target manager had recommended me, praising how I'd handled the harassment with professionalism and grace. It felt like the universe was finally balancing the scales. We settled into our new life in a different city. I threw myself into my new job. Marcus excelled at his, and we started talking about buying a house. Mom visited monthly, and our relationship continued to strengthen. She even started dating again, something she'd been too focused on Roy to consider before. 3 years passed peacefully. I'd almost forgotten about Roy, relegated him to a dark chapter in my past. Then Mom called with news. Roy had been denied parole. His behavior in prison had been problematic, manipulating other inmates, running scams, refusing to participate meaningfully in therapy. He'd be serving his full sentence. Part of me felt relief. Another part felt a pang of sadness. He'd had every opportunity to change, to get help, to become better. Instead, he'd doubled down on the very behaviors that had destroyed his life. Some people, I realized, were just too broken to fix themselves. Mom had stopped visiting him after the first year. She'd tried to maintain contact, but every conversation was Roy blaming others, refusing accountability, spinning elaborate fantasies about the life he'd have when he got out. She finally accepted what I'd known for years. Roy was incapable of change. Life moved forward. Marcus and I bought our house, a little 3-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood. We adopted a rescue dog who barked at strangers and made me feel safer. I got promoted to district manager, overseeing multiple stores. Mom retired and moved closer to us, finding her own apartment and building a life that didn't revolve around her children. Sometimes I thought about those 2 years when Roy controlled my dating life, made me question my worth, convinced me I was unlovable. It seemed like a different lifetime, like it had happened to someone else. The woman who'd cried in that Olive Garden booth wouldn't recognize who I'd become. I still have the videos and evidence stored away, just in case, but I rarely think about them. Roy took 2 years from me, but I refused to let him take any more. Every success, every moment of happiness, every milestone was proof that he'd failed in his ultimate goal of destroying me. The last update I got about Roy came from one of the other victims in our support group. She'd heard he'd been transferred to a different facility after getting into trouble with a cellmate. He was in protective custody now, isolated from the general population. A fitting end for someone who'd isolated so many others. Marcus and I are trying for a baby now. Sometimes I wonder if I'll tell them about Uncle Roy, the cautionary tale of what happens when entitlement and cruelty go unchecked. Or maybe I'll just focus on raising them with the love and support I didn't have, breaking the cycle of dysfunction once and for all. Mom has become an advocate for other parents dealing with toxic adult children. She shares her story at support groups, helping others recognize enabling behaviors and set boundaries. It's her way of making amends, of turning our family's pain into something helpful. As for me, I finally feel free. Not just from Roy's harassment, but from the fear and self-doubt he'd instilled in me. I know my worth now. I trust my instincts. I surround myself with people who build me up rather than tear me down. Roy wanted to destroy me, but instead, he taught me how to be strong. He showed me the importance of documentation, of standing up for myself, of not accepting abuse from anyone, especially family. In trying to break me, he forged me into someone unbreakable. I don't forgive him. Some things are unforgivable. But I don't carry anger anymore either. Roy is serving his time, facing the consequences of his choices. I'm living my life, building the future he tried to steal. In the end, that's the only revenge that matters. The girl who used to cry over failed. Dates is gone, replaced by a woman who knows her value. And that woman, she's doing just fine.